Knockout takes, Almunia saves, knockout follows in, Almunia saves again.
You believe in miracles? Yes!
Hard hit into right, back at the wall, tie game!
Hey guys, my name is Aaron Shellen, and this is another episode of Around the World Sports. It's been a spell since I've been able to conduct an interview. Now that my responsibilities with the Chicago Dogs are complete, I can get back at it. Today's interview is with Jack Michaels, and Jack has been the play-by-play voice of the Fargo Moorhead Redhawks of the American Association since 1995. He also does play-by-play for the University of North Dakota and hosts his own daily sports talk show up in Fargo. We talk about the current American Association baseball season, how he got into broadcasting, and he gives some really great suggestions for people like you and me, frankly, who are looking to knock down that door and get into the broadcasting industry themselves. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy it. And I am here tonight with Jack Michaels. He's there, trust me, there he is. Jack is the sports director for Midwest Radio Fargo Moorhead. He's the current play-by-play voice of North Dakota football as well as North Dakota women's basketball, along with the Fargo Moorhead Redhawks of the American Association of Independent Baseball. And then last but certainly not least, he also hosts his own daily talk show up in Fargo. So Jack, first, thanks for taking some time with me tonight. I wanted to catch up with you once the AA season came to an end for you and I, unfortunately. There are still teams playing, but the season came to an end for us. And I just wanted to take some time and kind of pick your brain a little bit, kind of see what you thought about the season, and just kind of get to know a little bit about your past. So again, thanks for taking some time with me tonight.
Good to be on with you, Aaron. I know that our first encounter was when you were in Fargo at Newman Outdoor Field, and I looked at the guy to my left, and I thought, now that guy enjoys what he does as much as I enjoy what I do. So it was kind of neat. We had to spend some time together in Fargo and catch up and get to know each other a little bit. And we both enjoy, obviously, what we do. So great to be on with you in this new form of Zoom, which I did not have 30 years ago when I started broadcasting.
Yeah, that's got to make it's got to make things easier. I mean, I've been, I'm a little bit younger than you, so I mean, I've grown up with technology, but it's got to make this, I know for me, it's given me an outlet that wouldn't have existed if we were stuck in the middle of this pandemic 10 years ago. I've been using Zoom to conduct these interviews and talk to people, and it's personal. It's the stories come across better doing it this way versus doing it over the phone, for sure.
I know we'll probably get into a lot of stuff tonight, but the amongst the many things that I've been able to do in my career, I remember when I was working in a radio station, one of my early years, one of our local sales guys developed, he was talking to the local Fox TV guys in town, said, hey, how about if we do a Minnesota Vikings show? And this is before Fox had the NFL. And they said, yeah, if Jack Michaels will host it, we'll get him and we'll put him with this other longtime legendary guy. And the legendary guy is well known. He'll sit and just Jack can bounce stuff off him. And your young guy, Jack, can host it all. And great. So sales guy came back and said, Jack, you're going to do a Minnesota Vikings show on Sundays prior to the Vikings pregame and all that. I said, great. So when I got over there and we started recording, because we recorded these, we weren't live. And the Fox people said, well, you can't use any video because we don't have access to the video back then because the games were like CBS and everything.
Yeah.
I went, wait a minute, you want me to do a football show and I can't kick to some highlights, for goodness sake? Yeah, we better not, we can't do that. So I would literally interview NFL guys during the week and put them on those carts, they look like 8 tracks.
Mm-hmm.
So, and put in sound bites of those. So whether it was Mel Gray, a former punt returner, or, somebody that I had interviewed. So I'd list all his reports. Then the guy in the back of the room, when we do our Vikings, time now for Vikings update, and I'd said, "Hey, we got a chance to catch up with Mel Gray this morning," and I'd play it off like it's live and go, "Mel, like he's going to join me." It got to be a point where I think I was saying, "Hey, Mel, I know you're getting taped up there. You got a big game against the Bears." Just and then some guy in the back would hit that cart and hit play, and his response, I'm like, "Man alive, did we really do that?" But yeah, we did.
Yeah, the things you had to do to put together a professional broadcast when you didn't have the technology that we have today. So yeah, absolutely. So Jack, first thing I want to talk about is the AA season's not quite over yet. Milwaukee and Sioux Falls are actually, I think, just gotten started in Game 3 of the championship series tonight. The Milkmen have a chance to close it out. They have a 2-0 lead here. What are your thoughts on that series? Because I find it really interesting. It's sort of that irresistible force of the Milwaukee pitching staff versus the immovable object of the Sioux Falls offense. And so far, the good pitching has defeated good hitting.
And if you'd have caught me a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I would have said exactly what you first said. I thought, well, as good as Milwaukee is, and it's like an all-star, especially when you get in the bullpen on top of, forget Kuzma and Holmberg and Hernandez. I mean, who just have arms and arms and arm. Oh, look, here comes another arm. But just viewing Sioux Falls, I thought, I could see Sioux Falls getting a split on the road and then coming home in their park, which they just, they
Bird
fit
cage,
well,
man.
right? Fit well in the cage. I thought, I could see this like a Sioux Falls on a 2-1 lead coming out of that Game 4, and then in their park maybe getting that to 3-1. But we faced both down the stretch, Milwaukee and Sioux Falls and St. Paul late, and as you know, and let two get away with Sioux Falls. They won one game on a 2-run shot in the top of the ninth. Took a 1-run lead and closed it out. Won the third game in that series. Sioux Falls down 4-1, put up 8 runs in the ninth inning. So all my chips are going Mike Myers club. Coulter can't throw him anything. Lago's going to knock the ball around the park. They've got enough stuff 1 through 9. Even Ryan Brett at the bottom of their lineup was getting action. Morales is tough to strike out. All this stuff for them. And I would have just totally gone Sioux Falls. Then we went to Milwaukee. And it was a battle. The Redhawks, as you know, the starting pitching staff for the Redhawks, like a who's who. It really was like AAA ball every night, calling games for, Braden Hagens and Matt Tomshaw and John Anderson. My goodness, right down the list. Tyler Pike. And the Redhawks went toe-to-toe with Milwaukee. And I thought, I don't know if Milwaukee can score enough runs against Sioux Falls. So I was chips were all in at Sioux Falls. And then you remember the adage in baseball where it truly is. I watched as much as Adam Brett Walker, player of the year, 22 home runs. I think Drew Ward for the Redhawks, they gave him a run for his money on that play. But I watched Adam Brett Walker dive and take a hit away in left field against the Redhawks. I watched Brett Vertigan make a front dive. I watched plays being made in right field. I watched Mason Davis go up the middle and take away hits. And the more I thought about it, I thought, this pitching and defense Milwaukee has, I started leaning back towards Milwaukee,
Yeah.
and now we see they're up 2-0. And if you're not scoring early, you may not score because their pen is so late. So early on, to me, it was like Sioux Falls offense. They'll get them. Let's not kid ourselves. Today's baseball, guys, those bandboxes and Sioux. But the more you put your mind to it, you're thinking, this doesn't shock me that Milwaukee's up 2-0. Not at all.
Yeah, the Dogs played their final, we're supposed to play their final 7 games of the season against the Canaries. The last 2 got rained out, but there was, the birdcage, man, I've never seen a ballpark like that. We played that first series, we played up there at the end of July, beginning of August. Dogs had a 10-run ninth inning. That was they turned around. They were down 9-1 going into the ninth. They scored 10 in the ninth. Ended up losing that game. Then they put up 13 runs the next game, 14 runs the game after that. I've never seen a ball carried to right center field like I had at the birdcage. And when we were there at the end of the season, their offense was rolling on all cylinders. There were no easy outs. I mean, you mentioned Ryan Brett at the bottom of the order. Even he had a bases clearing triple in one of those games.
Right.
That offense with a healthy Jabari Henry and with Morales back in there that gets Coulter out from behind the dish and gets him out into right field. I mean, that lineup, man, was just stacked 1 through 9, and Milwaukee they shut him out 2 nights ago. So yeah, it just you would think, like you said, with the way baseball is going now, you would think that eventually that lineup would, Logan Landon was as hot as any hitter in the American Association over the last 2 weeks. You would have just thought that lineup would eventually click, and it still might, because the next 2 games are right in the birdcage, and you're just as likely to see a football score in Sioux Falls as you are a 2-0 game. So. It'll be interesting to see if Sioux Falls has the issue with Sioux Falls is do they have enough pitching to hold off until their offense can get clicking? That's going to be the question, or are they going to get behind early and just not have enough time? So it'll be interesting to see how things go in Game 3 tonight, and see if the Canaries can maintain, or if the Milkmen are going to win it in just their second season. So.
Yeah, it's a great story. We didn't mention Dave McTomshay. I mean, it is in football terms, it's like, I mean, you have to score enough to win a football game. You have to, if it were going to be a shootout, and Sioux Falls do it, Aaron, and you've seen this, and nothing against the ground crew, they just don't have a lot of personnel that operates that field. So there's so much use on it. And Sioux Falls is like a different hot than Fargo Moorhead is, the weather that hits that. So as you know, the ball can jump around on cement like choppy dirt at times. And so that's another factor. Yeah. It's funny when I do scoreboard updates during my broadcast, I'll be like, well, let's go over to Impact Field and see what's happening. Oh, Chicago leading Milwaukee 13 to 2. Let's check in Sioux Falls. Oh, it's only the 4th inning. We'll get back to you on that one.
Right. I mean, 350 to right center field. I mean, every single fly ball that went to right and right center field, you had to brace yourself, because
you don't know where it's going to go. Yeah, it's going to go out, or it's going to hit an edge, and it's going to skip out. Then it's like polo grounds ish deep in parts of the field.
Yeah.
And then little league fast pitch softball deep in parts of the other field. Yeah, it's. You ever do this, Aaron? I look and go, you look at a player on your team saying, okay, what would Victor Roach, how many balls would he drive if he played in Sioux Falls every home game? Or we always say that, it's not a disservice of players in Sioux Falls, because it's baseball, it's not slow pitch softball, but some fields lend themselves to certain hitters, and I always think, going, wow, just think if Drew Ward played in Sioux Falls.
Yeah. For the Dogs this year, it was Joey Terdoslavich. He wore out Canaries pitching. He hit 4 or 5 home runs in the 6 games in the birdcage. He's a dead pull hitter. So it was every ball he hit as a lefty felt like it was gonna leave the ballpark. So. It was a lot of fun. I mean, the games were fun to call, but it's hard to win a championship in baseball at any level when you have a ballpark that's, I guess, that unique. I mean, just look at the Rockies, right? I mean, the Rockies have to build their roster around offense, because the ball is always flying out of the park. It's just hard to put together a dominating pitching staff, and it shows. The Canaries are back in the playoffs for the first time in a decade. So it's hard to win when you have a ballpark like that, because
and the ball jumps out of impact too. Chicago, Rosemont has such it's unique. I love it because it's nestled down. It's like growing up in Williston, North Dakota. I knew a friend who knew a guy who had a sunken living room. And you can go. He owned a car dealership. He was a rich guy.
Gotcha, yeah.
Well, we've got a sunken living room. I wonder what that's like. It's Impact Field. You walk in here, it's got this nice. You feel like intimate there, but there doesn't seem to be resistance on balls until maybe it reaches an atmosphere above. So you see balls just jump out of impact. You're not, and it's great, but different than Sioux Falls, but still jump. I think CHS is like that in St. Paul too. Fargo's unique because it's old Yankee Stadium, and you know
Right.
this, Aaron Broadcast game. If you don't have a center fielder that can't cover ground, left center gets pretty deep. And then I've seen players, Clint Coulter, or was it maybe it was Logan Landon for Sioux Falls, mashed like three consecutive balls. One 408 caught, one 398 caught, another one
Yep.
407 caught, and verbally my mic picked up a profanity going this field. I missed the adjective in there,
Yep.
but that's what it'll do to you. Yeah,
Yeah, that's one of I think the most interesting things about Newman is are the dimensions are replica of Yankee Stadium because
yeah,
Roger Maris played in Fargo, et cetera, et
sure.
cetera. But again, like you said, you have that huge left center and center field, and then the really short right field porch. So you're right, you need a center fielder that can that's rangy and can play that outfield position. You're going to play a lot of fly balls into double. So let me ask you about this season, because this was my first year calling games for the Dogs, my first season being involved with the American Association, and obviously it was a very unique season. Only played 60 games, and you had dispersal draft, and you had players coming from other leagues because we were playing and other leagues weren't. What was your overall impression of the level of play compared to previous seasons? Because it seems to me, just from an outsider's perspective, that you have fewer teams, more players, allows you to put together higher quality or higher caliber teams. Is that what you saw on the field too, or what were your thoughts on just kind of this season in general?
I think it played out, Aaron, over the span of as we got moving on this, because early on, maybe pitchers weren't stretched out early, so maybe we saw bullpens taxed earlier in the year. Uh, some guys that maybe hadn't got some work in the cage or enough work, or maybe weren't in a big league camp that didn't have any swings. So we saw those raw parts early on, and then you coupled that with limited or very few fans, and so from an atmosphere standpoint to the play standpoint, I started going, well, it's baseball, we're playing. And then things started finding their, the old saying of water seeks its level. Then you saw this talent seeking its level, and then thought, oh, okay, here we go. You mentioned Joey Tardosevich driving ball. Obviously some of those dogs found their rhythm. Same thing with the Redhawks. And then the pitchers started getting stretched out, and then they started finding their points. You started seeing guys going 6 innings, 7 innings. We had a guy, Matt Tomshaw, through 3 complete games. And you started seeing 100 pitches, 110. And I think it developed. And then this mix of talent that was AAA across the board. I saw guys that maybe tore up different leagues before and were playing in the American Association the first time. And I don't think overtly would say it, but probably thought, well, I'll come in this league and rake a little bit. Why
Yeah.
why should I? Why should my numbers drop? And there's batting 175, 212, going what the heck? Well, we saw the arms, and everybody had two or three arms that were either, if they weren't throwing 95 plus out of the pen, their stuff with their cutters and running balls in and razor sliders, and maybe not complete command, but boy, you can see with the draft how the American Association did that. We saw a lot of full teams that we probably aren't going to see again like this for a while. I would imagine if we do, great. But I think we saw a lot of condensed talent on clubs, which is why, to me, there were a number of teams still very much in it. Even the Dogs, if you guys would have made a run late, and I get it. I mean, it's a lot of games, travel. It's tough to climb teams.
Right.
Redhawks won 8 straight down the stretch, like 10 or 12, and then dropped a few at the end, and still were trying to fight to climb over. So you couldn't dig yourself a hole early. We saw Winnipeg jump out early, fall late. I think the season got to them,
Yeah,
taxed them a
for
little
sure.
bit, tired. But we saw what we saw. We saw a lot of parity, saw a lot of battling near the top, and then kind of log jammed in the middle with the bottom making some noise. and then the chips fell where they may with Milwaukee and Sioux Falls. But I thought the talent was off the charts. I think it was just fantastic baseball. I would have given my left part of my left intestine to play 40 more games to see what the 100 would have done, to see how many more runs would have
Yep.
happened. But I loved it. I've been doing it since the Northern League, and then Northern League merging into the American Association. And what I saw this year was like just off the charts, great ball. I really like. There was a couple of obviously games that got away from teams, but that's going to happen. But off the charts to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talked about the parity, and that really, I mean, the schedule with it being uneven. You know, the Dogs played. It seemed like they
Right.
played every other game against Milwaukee this season. You know, 60
Mhm.
game schedule. It felt like 40 of them were against the Milkmen. So you know there was an uneven schedule, but there was a ton of parity. I mean, you talked about it. I mean, Winnipeg got off to a really hot start, and you know playing every single one of their games away from home. You know, eventually that comes back to burn them, and you know you can't fault them there. You know, Milwaukee, their pitching staff really picked it up the second half of the season. The Dogs made a bit of a run in the middle of the season when their offense started to. Oh, there we go. Sorry, my camera just shut off for a second. The Dogs made a run in the middle of the season when their offense started to pick up a little bit. Their pitching staff struggled down the stretch. They had some injuries. Last week of the season, the Dogs only had 10 pitchers on their pitching staff that were healthy to pitch. So, but yeah, it was you saw a lot of movement in the standings, and I thought it was and that's what you hope for in a situation like that where you have where you are, I guess, recruiting talent, so to speak, from different leagues that aren't playing. You would have a parity, and you wouldn't have one team that ran away from it, and you didn't have that. So the Dogs, like you mentioned, we stumbled a bit down the stretch, but even going into those final 7 games against Sioux Falls, they weren't out of it. They needed, they had to win out those last 7, but they had a shot going into the last week of the season, and that meant that all 6 teams were in it coming into the final half dozen games of the season. So that, I don't think the American Association could have asked for anything better than that. I think the league showed, they showed really well. There was a lot of talent there that I watched, and I said, you know, this guy can play in the bigs, or this guy has the talent to play in those high minor leagues. And I saw it. I speak to what I saw, obviously, with the Dogs, but Joey Tardasovich was in the major leagues. He obviously has a big league hitter's batting eye. He wasn't going to chase a bad pitch. Michael Krause was a very good defensive outfielder. Had some power, has a ton of speed. I mean, there are some really skilled players in the American Association, and I don't want to say I was surprised at the quality of play, but I was pleasantly surprised, I guess is probably the best way to put it, at the quality of play. It was fun to watch, and it was a fun 60 games, that's for sure.
Yeah, it really was. I know that there's a reason the guys that have been in Major League Baseball, and I'm sure you said it on the broadcast, going, "Oh, here's so and so." 2 years ago, he was with the Diamondbacks, pitched for da da da. So you saw why these
Yeah.
guys were in Major League Baseball, and some that were in camps even this year, whether they stuck or obviously didn't, but you see why, and easily you could pull. I could grab a number of arms that you could pluck and put in a Major League Baseball game tonight, and they'd be getting outs.
Mhm.
They'd get outs. There's no question about it. So it was good. And on a side note, the weather. I don't know how you guys were all year in Chicago, but we had like one of our best weather seasons. There was just maybe a couple of times where the like rain got it, but you know, between that and then the COVID, we never knew about. We didn't know what was going on. Right now, the Dakotas are. I get it. If you've looked at the newspaper or heard reports, the Dakotas got numbers that are spiking, but Dakotas are also testing like crazy up here. I mean, it's like I walk out and I stumble into another. No, wait, I just tested. Wait, we're testing, but I thought that was the one thing because I was doing basketball in March, and then boom, that got banged, and bang, everything got banged, and all of a sudden going, how's anybody going to do anything?
Yeah.
And then they found a way in the American Association. So kudos to the league for being able to navigate. Like I always say, like trying to drive a car wash through a toaster. We somehow found a way to get through it.
Yeah, it was. There was some questions right off as far as COVID goes. There were some questions right off the bat because that first series of the season between the Dogs and the Milkmen, a couple of the Milkmen players tested positive.
Right.
So they had to cancel one game, but that was I think the only game or postpone one game. I guess that was the only game I believe in the entire season in the for the entire league that was postponed due to COVID. So they did a great job of keeping the players and coaches safe, and a lot of that falls in the lap of the coaching staffs. And I can tell you from conversations with Butch how seriously he took
Sure.
the league precautions. Butch. I mean, he's up there in age, and he's got medical
Right.
health. He's got some medical issues, and so I mean, he was very straightforward with me. I take this stuff seriously. Even if other coaches don't, I'm gonna follow the rules. I'm gonna make sure that I'm staying safe. I'm gonna make sure my players stay safe. One of the last things he said to me in one of my last pregame interviews was that we're struggling a little bit on the field, but we're batting 1,000 against COVID.
Yeah.
And I mean he took that really seriously, to make sure that his players were, and that's why like I didn't travel with the team. They kept me separate from the team because I wasn't around the team every day, so they didn't know what I was doing. They didn't know, what I was doing when I wasn't calling games. So I didn't travel with the team, and they did that for the players' safety, for the coaches' safety, and I can respect that. So as far as the weather goes, here in Chicago we had some streaks of bad weather, like the last week of the season. It rained every single day. But on the road, yeah, we got really lucky. We had one rain out in Fargo, wasn't it? Yeah, we had one rain out in Fargo, and that we had to make up and play a doubleheader, and that was it. That was the only rain out we had in any of our road games. So we got which is, I mean, you can't talk to how huge that is with the condensed season. If you start getting multiple rainouts, you see what the Dogs had at the end of the season. If Dogs would have had to have played back to back double headers the last two games of the season if they wanted to get all those games in. So yeah, all in all, it was a good season. I had a lot of fun, and we'll see where things go next year. But I hope to be a part of it in some capacity for sure. So. Jack, I want to take a step back now, and I want to talk a little bit about you and your history, because you've been with the Redhawks since the beginning, right?
Yes.
So
Yes. I took at a window there where I moved and came back, but yes, the
so
original broadcaster.
so how did you, not necessarily with the Redhawks, but for someone like me who's trying to kind of ease their way or work their way into this industry. How did you get started? And obviously things were different, 20, 25 years ago than they are today, but how did you get started in the broadcasting industry?
It's funny, Aaron, because I didn't even know that this was what was going to do, but like how everybody gets, everybody's story is different, but I just found a mentor, found a guy that was doing something I love. You and I talked before we came on this Zoom, is that you're like, we don't do this to make millionaire, $1 million and all that, but boy, it sure is kind of neat, right? It feels right, it fits right, it's all that. And I remember watching my high school play-by-play guy. All I thought he did was do high school for play-by-play. I realized they did like the egg markets at noon on the local station and all this other stuff. But he was really good at what he did. His voice was just, he was just had a tempo, top of the key, down right side, kicks it. I'm like, I just enamored by his job. So I started imitating him like when I was a sophomore, and I was fortunate enough to be on the varsity as a sophomore, and we'd get on our charter bus for our road trips, and I'd sit in the bus and start, well, there's Lee Halverson, top of the key, jump shot, basket, and I'd try to do his voice. So I imitated him so darn long that I've almost stolen his tempo and pace and even voice to some degree. So anyway, so I thought, oh, so you could actually make a living doing this. So then I started sitting in when he was doing games. When I was in college, I'd come back in the summer and I'd sit. Long story short, I thought, you know what, maybe that is my calling. Maybe that's what I'll do. So how do you do it? Well, how do you do it if you're a young person or a middle-aged person or a 30-something? Well, you find a place that'll hire you. Find a place that needs you. Why would you not go to some place where the opportunity that you want to do isn't there? So I'm thinking, what can I find out that where can I go that has that opportunity? And I took an evening job and rock radio and in Fargo out of school and my buddies would call in and request songs like, play Judas Priest, another thing coming. Come on, play. Which is funny because I'd have another one of my old teammates that would call in and request Delta Dawn by was like Tanya Tucker's. And I'm like, we
I
don't
can't
play
play that.
we don't play that. This is AC/DC country.
Right.
So, but I would record when they'd call in. I'd record them and put them over a reel, and then I'd back before people did it, and I'd ramp that call into the song, and so my boss then thought, geez, you see what he's doing at night? He's ramping these calls. That's pretty. I get moved to mornings, and I start doing mornings now. And all of a sudden, you're kind of off your radio gig. But my whole love was sports, and we had an AM signal. And I went to my boss and I said, well, everybody else doing sports. Why don't we sell some sports and do sports? You want to do sports? Of course, I want to do sports. Sports guy, and I played and so that's what happens. So go ahead and do we want to do a state tournament basketball. Certainly, yeah. Want to sell it? Hey, we got some sold. Great. Can I pick anybody that can do color? Sure, pick whoever you want. Grab my friends. We go out and drive, and I start doing play-by-play, and that lent itself to a job that I went to a radio station because of my morning show. Their afternoon guy on the radio station of Fargo went to WCCO in Minneapolis and still is the morning guy at CCO. Dave Lee, who's one of the legendary guys. So I was hired to fill in when Dave left the station in Fargo. And that's when our ownership, and I think he almost got to get a little lucky too, as you know, Aaron, because the people that owned us also in 95 started to get into this whole independent baseball. We're going to buy this team and we're going to be part of a 3-tier ownership. Dan Gladden, Gene Allen, a corporate lawyer in Minneapolis, and Fargo's Otter Tail Power Company. And they kind of, Danny, they, love Dan, but they kind of you know what, Dan, because I think Dan might want to play or manage or own or do a little bit of everything. Why not? What the heck?
Right.
But the other two are like, nah, they kind of bought that third out. So, and then they were looking for a broadcaster. Obviously, they're going to buy this team, and it's 1995. And they're going to need an announcer. By this time, I had done enough play-by-play and done some stuff where I was doing an afternoon show that was more of a health, heart, pocketbook afternoon show, and then I'd do sports. So they hired their GM, John Dietrich, who was a baseball gypsy, longtime affiliated guy that he was their GM, and they needed a play-by-play guy. And I knew that they needed voice. They needed to hire people. Josh Buchholz, who's now the executive director, he was part of the early parts of that. And so they came to me and they said, and by this time I was doing like CBA basketball. I'd either do the PA at the Fargo Dome, or if we aired a game, I would do the play-by-play of it. And the GM said, I heard you're really good at public address announcing. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a connoisseur of public, like leading off the shortstop, number 25,
Right. I've got the voice.
Do all that,
Yeah.
Just a connoisseur of PA announcing, So I said, yeah, I like doing that, but I'd rather do play-by-play. He goes, oh, yeah. Oh, you do baseball? I'm like, well, yeah. Well, technically, Aaron, I had done maybe Fargo's had the American Legion World Series. It used to be on a rotation. So I'd go do games for like, teams in Hawaii that would never send their announcer. So I did some Legion games. So I didn't have anything on tape other than the sound of an aluminum bat, it's just not. And he goes, well, bring me a tape and we'll sit down and listen. And if we like it, boom, your job. You got the Redhawks gig. You'll be the original, like, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have anything on tape of professional baseball. So I went home and I sat down in my basement and I think Cleveland and Seattle were playing an American League playoff series and did what we all do, right? I turned the sound down and did play-by-play of 3 innings of Cleveland and Seattle and brought it back to the station, put some ambient sound around it. And the next day I brought it into John Dietrich, the GM, and his office. I said, here's my tape. And I was going to leave. He goes, nah, sit down. Let's listen together. And I'm like,
oh boy.
Then we all, because we're all got a little bit of self insecurity. We're
Oh
like,
yeah,
well,
for
I
sure.
recorded that. Yeah, I was watching TV. I blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And which is a note to young people. Don't worry about that stuff. They know. People know. If you got it, they'll hear it. And John listened to about 20 seconds of that. I don't know what he heard, but if it was just a simple, here's a 2-1 pitch, Hideaway, 3-1 to count, beautiful day here in Cleveland. I don't know what he heard, but whatever it was, he goes, that's the sound, that's the pace. You got it. I'm thinking, I just labored for hours putting it. He listened for 20 seconds and said, job is yours. I'm like, oh my
Yours.
God. So that's kind of how I got the job. But to back to the question of how you get in, you know, I had to seek out, again, I was young, not single, but dating at the time before engaged and married and children, all that.
Right.
But I had to seek out a path that wasn't laden with, a high salary right out of the gate, and did what I had to do to get it. But you can't sit by and there's a fine line to me. There's the we should, and then you annoy your boss long enough and maybe they give in, or we should be doing, and you know your boss long enough to have him show you the door going, you know what, I don't. So there's that fine line I've had to balance about what I want, what's good for the station, what I can do, what can make a dollar revenue. But that's kind of how I got started. So I've done so much of IBA basketball and D League basketball and CBA basketball and college football and college basketball and NCAA basketball with North Dakota State and Redhawks baseball and all that. But none of that would have gotten to a spot where it was if I wouldn't have gotten to a place that allowed me to broadcast sports. So, and the man that did that just passed away like a week ago, Jim Lackaduck, which was just sad for me because he was the one that gave me a first shot. But, that's, I get emails almost once a week, a couple times a week that ask, hey, I want to get into sports and I want to do this. And do you have a spot open? And I wish like our company was hiring left and right, or I wish I knew companies that were hiring left and right. It's tougher now, but it's not impossible. So it's not at all.
Yeah, and you have to be willing to step outside of what you're comfortable doing. I mean, I love baseball, like every other, young kid growing up in America. I love baseball. I've always, it's always been a love of mine. And hockey, I grew up in New England. You're in North Dakota. I went to the University of New Hampshire. Hockey is huge up there. So, I've always been a sport. I've always been a sports guy. It's always been my dream, always been my passion. But I also understand that, I'm not going to get a phone call tomorrow from Nesson asking me if I want to be the play-by-play guy for the Bruins. There's a process there, and that process involves you doing things that maybe you aren't. I mean, you talked about doing, being a rock DJ and hosting a non-sports talk show. I mean, I've called Division 3 volleyball, and I've done, Division 3 swim meets, and I've done a ton of and I'll tell you, I absolutely love doing high school sports. The passion you see from those kids and those coaches is second to none. But people think that you're gonna wake up and you get a phone call from the Ricketts family going, hey, you want to come to the North Side and call the Cubs games. It's not how it works. So yeah, it's a great. I mean, I think that's kind of the story that most people sort of expect. That you have to follow to really get into this, and that it brings up an interesting question for you is how do you, is it difficult, or do you find it to be difficult to wear so many hats? I mean, obviously it's an unusual time right now, but if COVID wasn't a thing right now, you would still be calling Fargo Moorhead baseball. You would be getting ready for North Dakota football. You would have your daily sports talk show. You would be getting ready for the women's North Dakota basketball season. How did you juggle all that?
It's a it's a great question. Now I really feel old. It's funny because I'll never stop being Jack. Aaron will never stop being Aaron. You have a great personality, laid back. Maybe that comes with a family too and life experiences, nothing shocks you anymore, or living in near big city of Chicago, nothing shocks you. But even in Fargo, Moorhead, you know, I never let myself get consumed. I used to laugh when people would say, how many people want that job? Never really, never comes into my mindset. I don't care. I'm confident enough of what I do. I got a decent personality. I tend to work well with others. I listen. And the most important thing is to the wearing all those hats in broadcasting, I never lose sight for a second of what's coming out of a radio speaker. So I never lose sight of what a listener, why we do this. I never for once. It's never about me. It's never for you. I'm sure you'll say it's not about me. It's about the game. So and it's only about the listener and what they're hearing out of that speaker. So I never lose sight of that. So what do I have to do? Whether it's my noon show, to put together a show that a listener might find intriguing, or might find a guest intriguing, or might find a topic intriguing, or might want to play on the air with a topic. So that's that. My sportscasts in the morning that I at 6 and 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning. What am I putting together that tells the story of last night that a listener might understand it better? For basketball, same thing. What is it I'm telling a story about the University of North Dakota that a listener, this game, football, same thing. So it's always about what's coming out of the speaker, and it allows me to never have to worry about anything other than what's coming out. And as long as I lock in and focus on that, it kind of puts a now the prep stuff is where obviously guys like us that I could tell you, and I'm sure you're the same way, on Friday nights on football weekend trips, it's just littered. Maybe some of the crew is heading out, enjoying the local town wherever we are, and doing games in the Big Sky for 10 years. It's Portland, Sacramento, Missoula, Bozeman, out near Seattle. It's easy to get lost. But my Friday nights are two deeps and notes spread all over my bed. Study, 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 study. By Wednesday, if I can't name you, 40 guys, you give me the number, I'll give you the name, position, and a little bit. If I don't have that by Wednesday, I'm falling behind. If I don't have that by Friday, I'm in trouble. If I don't have by Saturday, Katie bar the door. So my mind doesn't allow me to do that. So as long as I have that, then the rest is just how do I describe this to the listener? So it really, it's time management. I'm not very great. I'm not the best at that, but I come from, parents that were educators, and so I've learned how to memorize. I've learned how to, because I know me. If I've got something memorized, I know maybe I could have a saying or two that's a little quirky that might be funny, or maybe a call that's kind of cool. I know all that stuff is there, but that stuff doesn't matter if I don't have the foundation of what I'm doing. So I speak to college kids, and you mentioned something, Aaron. This isn't a stereotype, the younger generation, but they hear home run calls like, track it down Marge that I use on baseball, or if you have a touchdown call in football, or you have this basketball call, and they want to go right to that. They ask it that. Do I need a big, well, I would say, yeah, but I mean, you're going to the end, it's not about the finish. It's about everything in the middle. It says you've got to learn that part. It's tempo, it's pace, it's timing, it's study, it's little nuggets you can drop in, not all at once, but every now. So I hope that young people getting into it come in with that attitude of broadcasting, because that's what's going to sustain you. Because you're not going to have Joey Tradasco is not going to hit 4 home runs every game.
Right.
You might actually have to do. Here's the 2-1 pitch, hideaway, 3 balls and 1 strike. Hey, did I tell you Chicago's having a parade tomorrow? That might be what is it. But so that's in a nutshell is kind of how I juggle everything. It's always the listener in mind. That's the job that I have. It's preparation leading up, which means I'm probably going to be better off not to fail at my job when I'm prepared. And the rest rest lays itself out.
Yeah, I mean, once you're on the air, I mean, I'm still, new enough to this that first 10 to 15 seconds that I go live, I still have butterflies. I see,
Sure.
Once I'm into my pregame, those butterflies tend to dissipate relatively quickly, but once you're on the air, I mean, that's the easy stuff. calling the game, innings 1 through 9 or quarters 1 through, that's the easy stuff, man. It's everything you're doing in that week leading up to the road trip or the football game or the seven baseball games over 6 days. That's the stuff that I think personally I have a strong enough work ethic. And for me, it's not even work. I mean, to if you told me 20 years ago that my work would involve me sitting and scrounging through Baseball Reference at statistics of baseball players, I would have said, sure, sign me up. So yeah, that prep, you can't. I'm new to this. You're the veteran, but you can't. I don't think you can stress enough how important it is to that your broadcast is going to be successful or not successful based on the amount of work you do leading up to it. You can have the greatest on-air voice in the world, but if you're not prepared, and it's going to come out, it's going to show.
And isn't that funny, Aaron? Because someone will say, "Oh, well, of course you do what you do. Listen, you've got such a great voice. Listen to your voice; it's so easy." And that's good. If your voice is confusing to listen to or something like that, I get it. That might play a factor. But I always tell young people, don't confuse your audience. You get some people. In fact, here's the thing. So when John Dietrich listened to 20 seconds of my tape, it said, "You got that job. You're our guy." Wow. Went home. Told my, I think fiance, I suppose at the time it would be, or whatever, maybe girlfriend, maybe before I dropped on one knee and asked the question. And the first person I called, and only because he would do some radio shows with me, was Kevin Harlan, who was one of the great
Oh wow.
voices.
Yeah.
Kevin Harlan. So he did the Timberwolves quite a bit. He was the voice of the Timberwolves when they were terrible, but Harlan was so good. You didn't miss a broadcast Kevin Harlan did. It was legendary stuff. So having had Kevin on a number of sports shows back in that day, I get the job. I call him right away. He doesn't answer. It goes to voicemail. "Kevin, this is Jack. Got a question for you. If you have time later tonight, give me a buzz." I get home. My fiance at the time says, phone rings. I'm downstairs. "You're not going to believe who just, hold on, I'll get him." And it's Kevin. "Jack, you called." I'm like, "Yes, Kevin, I won't take too much of your time. Thanks for coming on last week, by the way, in the show. It sounded great. Question. Just got a baseball gig, and it's for a professional baseball team. And I've done baseball, but not at this, that level or realm. Tips." And Kevin says, "Jack, I haven't done baseball. I don't do baseball." I said, "I know, but you were the voice of the Chiefs like at the age of 25. So, you've been around. You're kind of at the top of the game. You're about as good as there is." And I remember this distinctly. And Kevin just said, "Look," and you know this, he says, "Look, if it comes down to just spilling out stats all over the place or telling a story, tell a story." And I'm like, "That's exactly right." I said, "Thanks." He goes, "Yeah, good luck." So it's kind of neat. I hung up and boom. And so stats important, story even better. If Joey Trdoslavich is batting 340, that's outstanding. That's great. But if Joey saved a woman who was stuck in a blizzard somewhere near T, South Dakota in 1998 and jacked her car tire up and put her on a heck of a story.
Right.
How can I weave that in? That's kind of what Kevin was going at. And that is like that to me is, and you get some broadcasters that never stop and let a broadcast breathe, and they got to just and fill it with stats, and that's neat. But I don't know. I mean, I broadcast with my mother in mind, and she's 88 years old, and I don't know if it's nice she knows what exit velocity might be, only because maybe I described it. But as long as I describe it, but not harp on all these different nuances. Now I confuse my 88-year-old mother on exit velocity and launch angle and this and that. And all of a sudden, what am I, a rocket scientist? Yeah, you got to keep in mind that the peanut vendor just walked by and spilled beer on a guy in the third row. That would bring her more to the ball game. So, all that stuff is baseball. You don't have time in hockey, like you said, or basketball, but that's baseball.
Yeah, it's more about literally painting a picture of what you're seeing. One of my favorite things to talk about is, the color of the sky as the sun is starting to set. And, what the clouds look like off in the distance, because you're painting, you're drawing that image for your listeners of not just what the batter at the plate is hitting for the year, or how many home runs he has, or how many strikeouts the pitcher has in the game, but you're allowing them to be there with you, and especially now where people really can't be there with you, to be able
Right.
to draw that picture for them and say, this is what things look like at the ballpark. Baseball
Right.
affords you that opportunity to do that.
Oh,
So
it's just awesome. I found myself lately in the last decade or so, or 5 years or so, using more rhetorical, just weaving rhetorical questions in. Just I wonder why the Redhawks shift so dramatically against Casey Hobson. All he has to do is hit it well, and then here's the pitch, pulled to the right side. Oh, he pulled it
right,
through the shift, and then but at least someone's going, well, yeah, I mean he pulled it. Why? So I always say, I wonder if he's going to run in this situation. Let's find out. Here's the pitch. You know, Boy, it looks to me like Logan Landon's playing or Alonzo Harris, a very shallow center field. But of course, he always does. And then all of a sudden, you get lucky. Someone pops one, and Edwin Arroyo clears Alonzo Harrison center. And
right.
someone goes, "Ooh, Aaron did. He just told us he was playing shallow." Remember,
Yeah.
one rhetorical question confirms and makes announcers look like more geniuses than we sometimes are.
So, Jack, I only have a couple more questions for you. You've been
Yep.
more than generous with your time today, so I appreciate that. But first question is you've been, call it what you want, a staple of the Fargo kind of sporting world for over 2 decades now. Have you ever had an opportunity to go to a larger market? If so, what is it about Fargo that keeps you there?
Well, 23 years ago, it was the waiting of my identical twin daughters, and probably with, you
Sure.
know, those children, they're beautiful girls, and I know that they're over the last several years. I was like, Dad, why don't you just get a job with the twins? Dad, why don't you just get a job with the da da da?
Mm,
Dad, why the concept of, and even though you have ties, and I think somehow they feel like they're guilty if they held Dad back because they know that Dad made decisions based on family as opposed to a career in a
sure.
bigger market. I'd rather be around family and them than whatever gain it would have been. And there had been times over the years, and I remember Round Rock and Sacramento. There's some things open. Maury, my broadcast partner, allowed me to be in a close touch with guys that either own teams or were decision makers on their teams. I have a friend in Chicago there when I know that there was an opening in a Cubs system. Pat Hughes, by the way, is one of my favorite play-by-play
Hmm.
guys on the planet. And there was an opening there for pre-post in certain spots that I might have been able to jump into, but it didn't fit with salary and being a family guy and all those things. So there have been a number of opportunities, and I've always defaulted back to, yes, all that is great, but being away from the girls, I didn't want to make that to have to happen. And many people have to make those choices in life, and
Yep.
they're not easy. So I've chosen that route. Got an old saying, bloom where you're planted. So wherever I am planted, I try to blossom there. And so I said, you know what, if this is where I'm at, I'm going to make the best of it and get my hands in as much and do as good as I can and all that. And I won't regret not,
Mm,
driving to pursuing the Memphis Redbirds job or a Round Rock job or a Sacramento job or, you know, a friend of mine that bought a WNBA team in LA. She's a former North Dakota girl. She has since sold it or pursuing something in LA. And yeah, so to me, it was like, yeah, the opportunities have been there without question. And, who knows? I'm still young. I'm not 100.
that's right. That's right.
So,
And I can respect. I have 4 kids myself, and
yeah,
and
you know what that's about.
yeah, that there have been, I've been offered positions down in Southern Illinois, which are 6
Sure.
7 hours away, and it's tempting. Don't get me wrong, especially me, where I'm trying to get into this for the first time. It's tempting, but I'm happy doing this. I'm happy calling high school games and, getting these opportunities to step in for Sam this year and doing the Dogs games. And, and if
Let me
some,
stop you there too, Aaron. Let me ask you this. I know you're asking me, but let me ask you
sure.
this. My guess is, and knowing you for now as I've known you, you wouldn't call a high school hockey game or volleyball game or baseball game or basketball any different than you'd call a Boston Bruins game or a Celtics game or a Red Sox game, right?
No, absolutely. And I said this a little bit earlier. I absolutely love uh, calling high school sports. There's something, it sounds cliche, but there's something pure about it. I tell a story. I was the color guy for the West Aurora boys basketball team this past season. The play-by-play guy, Neil Ormond, has been calling West Aurora games for nearly 50 years.
Wow.
And so I step in year number one. I'm his color guy, and we go through the season, and the team struggles. They were like 9-18 or something. They're generally a powerhouse, but they struggled this year. They lost like their top 4 scorers, and it was a difficult season. But they made a run in the postseason. They beat a 23-win team and a 27-win team to win the sectionals, or to win the regionals, and then they went on to the sectional tournament. This was right before COVID. You said you were doing basketball in March.
Right up
So was
until
I.
March, sure.
So was I. I actually did the last basketball game in the state of Illinois that allowed fans. Because the very next day, the NBA shut down, and then 2 days later, the IHSA shut down. But they lost in the sectional championship game to their rival, which is East Aurora. It's Aurora, Illinois is broken up. There's multiple schools. West and East are huge rivals. They've played 280 times or something over the last 120 years. And the game ended. West lost by, I don't even remember, it was 10 or 12 points. It wasn't all that close. But I remember I went up to, I always did a pre and a post game interview with the head coach, the Brian Johnson, who's fantastic guy. And, this game ended and his players are crying and, East Aurora's celebrating on the court and, the fans are on the court and everything else. So I made the decision that, I was going to let coach go be with his players. I was going to let him go, make sure that his kids were doing okay and everything else. And he came up to me. He said, "Hey, do you want to talk?" And I was completely taken aback by it. And I said, "Yeah, of course." So I interviewed him for, 5 or 10 minutes after the game. And when the interview was over, I was completely blown away because you aren't going to see that in professional sports. You're not going to see somebody who actively seeks out a reporter post game after dropping a playoff game and going, "Hey, do you want to talk?" These guys, they sit at the podium and they answer the questions as generically as possible and they move on. But Coach Johnson came up to me. He seeked me out in the crowd and made himself available. And it was at that point I said, "Man, I love high school sports."
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That to me, again, that you mentioned the word, there's a purity to amateurism. And I still try to believe, colleges like that, but even though the more we go about this,
Yeah.
sometimes even college seems like it gets a little tainted, but the high school, that's why this year when the COVID hit, and both financially from station standpoints, many media companies were losing money because nobody's advertised, nobody's open. It's tough
Right.
on everybody. And so, I thought, God, what can we do at our station? We service a pretty good chunk of people. And I came up with Little League Night in America. And my GM said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, here's the deal. Here's my idea." I said, "We got nothing going on. Redhawks aren't starting, probably." I said, "What if we took one of our guys, our talk show guys, big political talk show guys, he has this big motorhome that's sponsored with ag sponsors and all this farming and stuff."
Yeah.
I said, "What if we took his motorhome to Little League fields that are playing, and I give him a full bore play by play. We put it on one of our big stations. And since we don't have the Twins on, I'll broadcast it, but I'll do it no different than I would a Fargo Moorhead Redhawks game."
Well, that's great.
and we'll do it like even, so we started doing like you see in the Little League World Series. So I'd go out there, and before I'd say, "What's your name?" and what do you like? Your food, and you'd get it. I'm Tommy. I love turtles. I'm Joe. I love playing. And what was coming out, so we did it not knowing how it was going to be. And that first night was like a home run, and these kids are, so we're right next to the diamond, and we got speakers. We're on the radio, and we've got speakers there in the field. And I'm like, here's Joey Bucknell. Here's the pit. Oh, swung on, driven high and deep. And it might be going to the back of the infield. It's chaos because it's Little League.
Right. Yeah.
The kids are all flashing. And then we did their intros. I'm Aaron. I love trucks. I'm this. So that came at the beginning. We did that bumper music in, called 3 innings of a baseball game, sewed it up, capped it up, banked it, saved it. So we did it live, and then the parents went berserk. So we did that literally for like 2 months at Little League fields all around the metro area, in the rural areas. And by the time we were about our fourth Little League game in, people were coming out from these local little communities, and umpires were just, hey, everybody lifted their game up.
Yeah.
And it was like, this is as pure as it gets. It doesn't get any more pure than this. And I had as much fun there as I would calling a Redhawks championship, back in the day. So back to you said the word purity in sport. That's just clicked my mind. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, that's a memory that those kids will take with them, and that's kind of how I would go into these games, into these high school games. I mean, West Aurora basketball would have 1,500 people there, in
Sure.
their prime, so it wasn't a small deal, but. I would call. I did high school hockey. I was the play-by-play guy for a high school hockey team here north of Chicago, and they had a difficult year. They won one game all season, but my call of their one victory, it was an overtime victory, is probably my favorite. My favorite call that I have done prior to doing the Dogs this season, the 10-run ninth inning. I mean, it was so emotional, and to see the kids' reaction and the parents' reaction, and just be involved in that, and to be a part of that is such a good feeling.
And again, that tells me more about Aaron, because the same reason. I wasn't thrilled because it was like the parents were gooing and gaga. I'm thrilled because that 10-year-old just thinks this is the best thing in the world.
I'm on the radio.
Because what you just said, those kids were and that's the deal. And the minute that young broadcasters, if you're in it, you all got to have tapes. You got to have how you sound on tape. I get that. But if you're in it because, the dunk call you made was fantastic, that's good. It kind of makes you feel good that you had a good call and you treated it right. But in your genuine heart of hearts, you're doing it because it highlighted the athlete, or highlighted the little leaguer, or highlighted the hockey player, that scored the game-winning goal. If that's the reason you're doing it, then you're on track to a long, nice career of doing it. The other people, and we get it all, don't we, Aaron? I mean, in our business, you can tell the announcers that are just in it to get it, and they'll even post it. Listen to me here, as opposed to, the Dogs won. What a hit by Joey T or Edwin Arroyo with that. There's a difference in our field, and there's some that I think get it, some that maybe don't so much.
Yeah. So my last question for you, Jack, is you've called a lot of games in your 20 plus years in the Fargo area. You could relive one moment as a play-by-play guy. What would it be?
Wow. Excuse me, did you ask me which daughter I liked better?
Well, they're twins, so I hope the answer is neither of them, but it's hard.
Which one of my identical twins I like better?
Yeah, it's a hard question. I know. It's a hard question, but
there's one moment I keep coming. Let's stay with baseball then, and since we're talking American Association, Chris Coast, as you've maybe come to know a little bit, who has a great story. Chris is now the interim manager of the Fargo Moorhead Redhawks. Chris, raised by his mother only, his story is one of went to Division III school, spent many years in minor league baseball, and finally got a shot, and worked his way. And with the Phillies, went up and won a World Series in 2008. Was a big part of that Phillies team. So the ending is this phenomenal story of a World Series title. But back when Chris was just, the local guy who the Redhawks signed because he was a good athlete and he's a local guy. He didn't have that success Darren Erstead did, out of the gate, first overall selection overall. Travis Hafner went on to a nice career. He's a North Dakota guy. You mentioned Roger Maris.
Right.
Rick Helling was a pitcher for the Rangers. There have been a lot of North Dakota guys, but Chris hadn't been on that form yet. And so he's playing for the Redhawks. And we're in a postseason series against Winnipeg, which is the Redhawks rival, and really was heated back in the day. I mean, it was heated, and it was a dark night, darker than a stack of black cats. I mean, just pitch black night, and bases loaded, and Coaster is at the plate, and the count gets to 3-1 in this playoff game against Winnipeg. And your heart, because Chris, even the short hair back then kind of reminds you like of watching a Roger Maris as a young boy. And he's the local guy. And the 3-1 pitch comes in and it's 7 inches off the plate. I mean, ball 4. And I'm into the call, ball 4. And it's a delayed strike call. Oh. And I'm like, oh my good. Now back then I was probably a little younger and more like, well, how could that be a strike?
Yeah.
And now I'm like, oh, tough break, whatever.
Right.
So Chris is 3 steps to first, and he had already assumed ball 4. Here's the strike, and he gets back in the box, and that next pitch was a hanging slider that got too much of the plate, and Chris puts a swing on it, and he sends it into that Newman Outdoor Field night to left field, and you broadcast games there between the scoreboard and what I call the fair pole down the left field line. So, and it's gone. I mean, it is into the night. And the emotion and the coolness of the fall air and a playoff, and the fact that it was Chris, the local guy, that wasn't Daryl Motley, who was on the team that was a World Series champion with Kansas City, that it wasn't some of these big name guys, that it was the local guy against a big time team. Rick Forney was a pitcher for the Gold Eyes, and he homers. So we went from the ball 4, oh my gosh, agony, to back in the box, and the next pitch he homers. And I think my call was so, you wish you were on Cinemax because you probably wanted to use profanity because you were so just your body. And I think I said, oh my gosh, Chris, I think I got to track it down margin. But that night, that feeling for him is one where you can just embody yourself into what's going through his mind. And we live vicariously kind of through these athletes. Mm-hmm. And to this day, I get goosebumps. Chris may have won a World Series with Philly, but I guess if I called him up right now, had him come over and jump on with you, he would think that highlight was as big as the 4 hits he got off the Mets to put the Phillies in first place in the NL East race in 2008, maybe even bigger. So that to me is a memory that I'll not forget when it comes to baseball. No question.
Talk about living vicariously through these players, and we talked a little bit about this before we went live. But as a broadcaster, you really need to treat these games just like the team does. Win or lose, when the game's over, and you got to start preparing for the next one. You can't dwell on your mistakes. You can't dwell on the mistakes that were made by the team. But when something like that happens, like when we did that first game in Sioux Falls and the Dogs were trailing 9-1 going into the 9th inning and they scored 10, including a game-tying grand slam.
Unbelievable.
They ended up losing that game in 11 innings, but I got back to the hotel and I'll tell you, I couldn't sleep. I was so wired and I was so energized from the experience, and I did nothing other than tell people what was happening. And I wasn't involved. I didn't tell Tyler to look for a hanging slider on 3-1. Right. I was up in, I was 100 feet away up in the press box just calling it. But I remember I was talking to a friend of mine after the game, and I had to ask, I was convinced that I was going to have to go in and I was going to have to edit down the audio because I was sure that my call, I was so loud and so energetic that everything was spiking. And he was like, no, you sounded great. It sounded natural. And, but I was so wired from it that I don't think I slept until probably 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning.
It was amazing. And that's like the little kids in us that it's what only brings out of sports. I mean, I don't know anything else. I mean, if we I don't know, maybe if we broadcast a band concert, maybe we would get excited about the saxophone
Right.
solo. I love a good saxophone,
Well, who doesn't? Yeah.
I was, but no, I just spent last night. Unfortunately, we had a former NDSU basketball player at the age of 29. His funeral was today.
Oh,
Passed, wife, newborn, child, very young, just sad. So a lot of the guys and some are playing pro ball overseas, and they're all over the country. They all got back together last night, and we were just hashing out old stories and finally remembering. And we brought up when North Dakota State was playing Notre Dame, and it's so funny because yeah, you got a mid-major D1 versus Notre Dame at Notre Dame, and I was reflecting on how they when you get there and you do a basketball game at Notre Dame, all the ushers are in red coats, jackets, and you know oh, let me help you, Mr. Michaels. This is and they're very cordial, but it's almost like thanks for coming, and don't take any
yeah.
offense when we
Yeah.
kind of beat you. Pat Covington's on the squad, and they got a club. North Dakota State, they didn't realize how good North Dakota State had. They had a good crew, and they picked off Notre Dame that day. And and speaking of Roger Maris, I roomed with his grandson. Like Richie Maris was our student manager, who's Roger's brother's grandson. So that's how I got credit Notre Dame right away, because I could feel like we are,
Yeah.
you know, there's like a pity party going on that you're gonna probably lose tonight. I'm like, hey, you see that kid? That's Richie Maris. That's Roger. Oh my gosh! So that gave me like instant cred. And then the boys went out and beat Notre Dame, and we were talking about that. And that night afterwards, I went back to the hotel room and just sat there and went, wow, this is thinking about the dunks and all that and everything that happened and what it took. But it just confirms. But again, you had as much fun in that hockey game, overtime win, one win all season long,
Yep.
as I did calling a little league game this summer, as I did calling a Bison game beating Notre Dame. It's all, to me, it's all the same,
It
right?
is. It is. Well, Jack, we've been chatting here for over an hour, so I want to give you the rest of your evening back. I really appreciate your time. Um, thanks for joining me tonight. Thanks for making things fun for me up in Fargo. It's intimidating, man. When your first game is on the road and you're in an unfamiliar place and you don't know where you're supposed to go and you don't know where you're supposed to park and you don't
Right.
know where you're supposed to eat. You took good care of me up there at Newman, and I really
Well,
appreciate that.
well, I know we hit it off right away because again, personalities are pretty casual,
Yeah.
and it was good. And I just enjoyed, like, I'm like, now that's a guy that gets it. That's a guy that's here having fun doing it. And as you remember that day going, man, this is great. And I'm sure it tells in your broadcast, it shows, someone that's not having fun in what they do, you can only fake it for a while. But someone that does, you can tell forever, and you can tell with you. So that's good. And I've got another bacon cheeseburger waiting for you here at Newman
Awesome.
Outdoor Field.
Awesome. Bacon cheeseburger, no pickles, no tomatoes, no onions. I'm right there with you. So,
We'll just
Jack,
call it the Aaron.
yeah, there we go. There we go. Jack, I appreciate your time today. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll get a chance to reconnect at some point next season.
Let's do it. Thank you, Aaron.
All
To
right.
you and your family. Be safe there in the great Chicago area, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Jack.
You bet.
I hope you enjoyed our time today with Jack Michaels. I can be reached on Twitter at SportsGuyAaron or on Facebook and YouTube at Around the World Sports. Video versions of all of my interviews are located on those platforms. Audio versions of this and all of my interviews can be found anywhere podcasts are located. While you're checking out my other content, leave me a like, subscribe, and or follow. That would be greatly appreciated. Feel free to hit me up at any of those locations if you've got questions or ideas for future interviews. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.